I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels. K-pop industry is the heinous industry that we have right now. Eating disorders are rampant in K-pop idols and boy bands and boy groups or girl groups. Mental health issues like depression is something that is very popular among these K-pop idols because of the tense and the heavy work burden that they are having. But also, most importantly, there is a significant inequality between men and women and how men and women are being treated inside the K-pop industry and outside because of K-pop industry. So therefore, we as an closing government really think that the feminist movement should just aggressively oppose the K-pop industry and abolish the demand that makes our women's life or our men's life too, for example, are in a miserable place. Before I go into my rebuttals, I will explain to you how distinctive we are with the opening government. In our closing government, we will explain to you how the major contribution of beauty standard are caused by people inside the industry themselves, and how we want to protect the most vulnerable people and community that are really important, that is the women inside the K-pop industry, right? But also we will explain to you more about how the beauty standard, which the opening bench seems to fail to realize how it works. But before I go into my substantive, I will do some rebuttal first, right, about the opening opposition. Opening opposition basically tells you two things. They try to argue firstly that K-pop isn't the main cause of beauty standard, and secondly how the K-pop will bring more inclusivity in terms of beauty standard, like because of men wearing makeup. We will prove to you that is wrong. Firstly, on K-pop isn't the main cause of beauty standard. Okay, if that is so what they believe, but we think one of the K-pop is one of the perpetrators that reinforce the beauty standard itself, right? And it doesn't mean that it is good. The meaning that the K-pop industry are actually very complicit on making the beauty standard happening. How do they do this? They do this by their system, right? They only show how like men and women that are typically the same. For example, they only show in the TVs how the women are being thin, the women having fair skin, and so on and so forth, and therefore it creates a beauty standard that makes other people wants to adhere to that beauty standards too. So therefore, their argumentation about the possibility how it will create a more beauty standard, like eventually there will African beauty standard or black community beauty standard, won't happen, because now the beauty standard are being reinforced, remembering how influential K-pop right now, and therefore people will only adhere to these specific beauty standard. Like people want to look like Korean idols, so therefore it will less likely to happen, the beauty standard that will exist, unless we stop it now. But secondly, they also say that it creates a diverse beauty standard or inclusivity because men wears makeup. Firstly, we think it is wrong. It is not a form of inclusivity, because these men that wears makeup do not wear it in terms of expressing their identity, right? They wear it because of exactly the supply and demand that they explain from society. So therefore the inclusivity do not exist. Like for example, J-Hope from BTS, he doesn't wear makeup, for example, because he wants to express himself, to be inclusive to himself, because and wear makeup. But he said it himself that he thinks that he is ugly if he's not wearing makeup. So therefore the inclusivity among men do not happen. But even if it happens, it will only lead to worst case scenario. Feminization and fetishization is one of the main issue in K-pop industry right now, which creates a fan service obligation towards male K-pop idols to like adhere to fan requests on how to act like women or gay people, which we think is only correct if the male idols are consented to it. But the thing is, not all of them are consented to it, right? So therefore, you cannot buy all of their arguments. Now let's go into my substantive. On firstly, why K-pop industry is inherently bad and why do we want to aggressively oppose it. But we need to clarify first, because the opening government do not say this, right? We mean by feminist movement aggressively opposing is that we actively campaign that K-pop is like a bad thing, and that how we want to abolish that kind of demand in our society unless they do some kind of reform. That is our goal here, because at the end of the day, our goal is to reform this kind of specific industry, right? So going into my substantive, we think that the K-pop industry is bad and therefore we need to oppose it, because firstly, it's the fact that This K-pop industry are actually we found a major inequality in it, right? In how they like act towards men and women. Like for example, women are only being seen as something that are their body and how they look and how pretty they act, not only because of the talent. This is caused by the beauty standard that is caused not only by the society of Korea, for example, but also the major stakeholders in the K-pop industry themselves. I will explain to you later. But the thing is, the major example that major inequality happens is, for example, the ITZY, for example. ITZY has a really good choreography and is very hard, regardless you are men or women, to do that. But people only see the fact that they are these youngsters and women, that therefore they are not focused on their talent, because at the end of the day, the society inside the Korea and the society inside the K-pop industry only thinks that women are being seen as less. Like for example, even like Kai EXO, for example, he actually mocked how the girl group dance are actually easier. So therefore, the major inequality exists under K-pop. But also, secondly, the reason like the K-pop industry is inherently big because of how women are being added into an expectation of the major stakeholder in K-pop industry that is dominated by male. This male obliges women to act certain way and talk certain way, for example, not only by supply and demand by society, but also by major stakeholder. Like for example, a lot of girl group, for example, are being forced to sleep with the director if they want to go to variety show and to do like big champion and music show, for example. So therefore, this dehumanizes the woman, and we want to protect those because at the end of the day, these major stakeholders are very inherent and cannot be reformed unless we aggressively oppose. But secondly, the problem with K-pop industry is that women cannot express themselves freely because they are under the demand of the major stakeholders, right? So self-actualization would happen like in opening opposition, because self-actualization obliges you to have a pure happiness, but happiness, success. But the parameter of self-actualization in K-pop right now by this situation is that you need to adhere to industry society, because the women can only like being success if they adhere to beauty standard, right? So therefore, the self-actualization is not organic. So that's why we only see BTS being successful and not a lot of girl group being successful, because they are not being able to survive under the girl years of being exploited. And lastly, it will bring to reform, because women now are being hurt. They did not have any platform before because they are afraid this is their main source of money, right? The feminist movement being aggressively opposing give them the platform to talk, and therefore the reform will exist. We're very proud to propose.
Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, we're gonna win this debate, but first of all, I'm gonna give civil rebuttal to the other side of the house, which is the opening opposition. So, the leader of opposition, they said that it's okay because there's a beauty standards and there's a spectrum in the beauty standards in the status quo. Like the Korea have the standard, but also the Western and India also have the standard, and it will engage with the question why it should be only on K-pop industry. So first of all, we want to clarify that yes, that is the fact that each culture has their own beauty standards, right? But it becomes problematic. Why? Because the first one, K-pop is glorified too much currently, so many people admire and make the idol in the K-pop as their role model. That's the first one. And the second one, the standard that they have is really extreme. I'm gonna explain how extreme it is later on. And also, if we link those two together as the role model, which is the K-pop idol and the industry, for many people, the extreme beauty standard that they said is gonna be followed by the fans in the world. It's totally different with the other culture that they mentioned, like the Western or the India or the other culture that they have their own beauty standard, because the trend right now is focusing on this K-pop, not the other culture. Like this is already mentioned by the leader of opposition too, which they said it's refreshing and it's started to shift into the K-pop. So that's why it should be the K-pop industry that should have been opposed aggressively by the feminist movement, not the beauty standard by society or the other culture. Okay, and the second rebuttal, also the leader of opposition say that she brings the good side of the K-pop, such as like the idol have the main achievements, or the idol having the good hard work, and so on and so forth. But we think that those positivity is toxic. Why? Because the hard work, the first one, because the hard work that they show will be nothing if they cannot fulfill the beauty standard that is set by the agency and also the society. That's the first one. And the second one, when they achieve something, they also have to pass this standard first, right? Which the standards are really problematic. But that's why it's morally unjustified, because the positivity that they show is really toxic. Because why it's toxic? Because it's harmful to the idols, especially the woman. So several clarification before to the next rebuttal. I already mentioned several extreme standard, beauty standard in the K-pop. And what does it mean? So let's take a look on some example that brought by my first speaker. The first one, like the eating disorder problem. It caused by the standard to be slim in the K-pop, right? The woman in that industry is afraid to eat because they're afraid to oppose the society's and agency demand. And it becomes a common thing in the K-pop industry when the idol have an eating disorder. It's really problematic. But secondly, let's take a look on how mental issues become common in the K-pop industry too. For example, when the woman's idol being judged by the society just because her behavior is not as the social expectation, like she need to be polite or so on and so forth, and then the proof of this mental issues caused by that is like there are many suicidal cases in the women's in the K-pop idol and also the men too actually, and that's really problematic in there. And there are a lot of this extreme beauty standard in the K-pop that is really problematic, and we cannot justify them in one way or another. And let's take a look on the deputy leader opposition. So he said that K-pop is industry, right? So the nature of it's profit oriented, and they have to fulfill the demand from society because the standard is set by the society, not the K-pop. But we think that exactly because of that, we cannot justify that society and agency standard towards the woman especially. And because it's never been absolute to justify the nature of industry, why is it not absolute? Because it will bring harm. And furthermore, because K-pop has the powerful influence, they shouldn't make the Western standard in the society worse, right? Because they have the power. How can K-pop make it worse? It's simply because the K-pop show the normalization and they normalize it more. For example, in without the K-pop, the thing is sounds like a standard beauty, right? But it will become such a necessity in the teenager because it being glorified more by the K-pop. The idol, have you ever seen the idol? The fight idol, for example. So it's like something necessary for women to be thin, and it shows by the K-pop and influence the teenager or the people that making them as the role model, and it's really harmful, right? So those are the rebuttals into the opening opposition first. And let's take a look what our side, especially the closing government bring. So we show how aggressively opposed we are, which do not mention by the opening government. We will what we mean by aggressively opposed in here, we will do rampant campaign, and we will not stop the campaign until the K-pop do the reform, right? And also we also show you how we prove how harmful in that industry and how we solve that, right? So the K-pop is inherently bad because of two reasons. The first one, like my previous speaker mentioned, because there is a major inequality between the woman and the man in the workforce. Because woman is being seen as less, it caused by the beauty standards set not only society but also the major stakeholder in the K-pop, right? So it will put the woman in the most vulnerable position in that industry, and that and by our side, the most vulnerable groups in K-pop get protected. With our clear mechanism in aggressively opposing, as I mentioned previously, we will keep campaigning until they reform and so on and so forth. And the second one, why the K-pop is inherently bad, because women cannot express themselves freely in here, right? Because they're stuck under the demand from the society and agency. Therefore, self-actualization cannot happen in the opposition, right? Because it will because to make it happen, women have to express themselves and have organic success, which is through that the situation in the K-pop industry, they cannot express themselves and have the organic success. So that's why there's the self-actualization in there. And then also we show how we want to push the reform in here, because we aggressively oppose it. We provide them the space to speak up, right? And how we create this space for this woman's idol to speak up, because the idol will know, because the rampant campaign that we create, they know that actually they have the a huge movement that gonna support them if they are speak up. So that is how we will create the better space for this woman's idol to speak up. So that is why we win, because the first one, we can protect the most vulnerable members in the K-pop industry, especially the idols movement. And also the second one, we can have the reform in the most heinous industry in the world, which is the K-pop industry. We are very proud to propose this motion. Thank you.